Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Reddit. What is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? Serious, episode 15. My bride's parents live in a monstrous brick house that was built in the early-ish 1800s. It's been fully restored and is a uniquely beautiful house. There are several areas in which we have witnessed some weird things and several of which I have debunked. There are slave corridors behind every wall and 2 dedicated slave staircases within the house that come out by the kitchen and one by the master bedroom. There is also a room in the basement with a handle only on the outside. Within this room is the coal room, which used to be the main source of heat for the house, and there are hooks on the wall, which the slaves would be chained to, and their beds hung from. The final odd area is the attic, of course, which kind of reminds me of the room in Harry Potter that somehow only he is ever able to find. Here are the happenings/oddities. The animals, including the cat, avoid the slave areas at all costs. We stayed for the weekend with our dog, and I took him outside via the staircase behind the kitchen. He goes ballistic as soon as the entrance to the staircase is visible running the opposite way. The floors are all wooden, and his feet are flying out from under him, and he has a terrified look on his face. He does that in front of both slave stairs and the door to the basement. Next oddity was when they first started to remodel the inside. When they returned home, they would find their 2 kittens inside clay pots with the lids underneath locked in the pantry under the stairs. This happened almost every day for the first year they lived there. They used to think there was a spirit of some kind in the attic, but I put a live trap up and caught several raccoons. The only thing that has ever truly creeped me out happened very recently. My mother-in-law found a set of true silver candlestick holders in the house when they first moved there, and has since bought some replicas which are nearly indistinguishable from the originals to place all over the house. In one day, all the silver holders vanished as her mother's wedding ring set. We assumed a family member had broken in since none of the expensive electronics had been taken. A couple of days later, their furnace goes out in the basement, so I do my son-in-law duties and go to help her dad fix it. While we're in the basement, we walk past the coal room and understand something clearly at last glimmering off of something in the back of the room. Her dad and I walk in there to see what it was, and the door slams behind us and locks from the outside, and we hear a deep laugh. Kidding. We walked in the room to see what was shining, and it was her silver candlestick holders and mother's wedding set. We both got this sickening feeling, grabbed the items, and went back upstairs. We showed them to her mom, and she just put them back where they were originally, saying in a loud voice, if they take them again, they can just stay down there. We're merely borrowing them from the house, but they can't have my mom's wedding set, and hasn't mentioned it since. I have since went down to investigate the room, because I thought it may have been raccoons and a random stroke of luck, but I found no tracks other than some snake trails in the coal dust. I had just recently moved to a new city and a friend, and I went drinking downtown. As we were heading back home, we waited for our buses, and this crazy-looking guy asked us if we had any change. We both politely said no and tried to slowly walk away from him to a more populated area. He followed us and whispered, "Maybe if I shove this knife in your neck, you'll change your mind." We quickly walked away and noticed there was a police patrol guy across the street, so we called him over. It all happened very quickly, but we ended up missing our last bus, and the police dropped us off at our individual houses. My dad saw the police car and at first was angry, but noticed I wasn't in handcuffs. When my mom came out to see what was going on, I explained the entire thing. The police officers said the guy had escaped from prison up north and was on the run. It was basically my first experience with big city life and traumatized me for a long time after that. I used to live at a hotel in Norway for a period of 3.5 years. Now every hotel has a ghost story, and this hotel was not an exception. So I stayed in this room on the 5th floor and had not been warned about the spooky stuff that happened here. During the day, I could hear a child cry from the bathroom. Now this can be explained very easily by jointed piping within the building, so I thought it was hearing a child crying from another room on a different floor. In the middle of the night, I woke up and still heard the child crying, and I heard it distinctly coming from the bathroom. It was the same voice as earlier with the same intensity. The next day, I told the clerk that the child in the room beneath me had kept me awake since I could hear the child cry through the piping in the building. She first said that there were no children living at the hotel that night. Secondly, she said the pipes were not joined. And thirdly, she said that the room I stayed in that night was their haunted hotel room. It's not a very creepy or scary story, but I find it very amusing. I was living at my grandmother's house when my dad took it over after she went into the nursing home. My grandmother was deeply religious and had a story about how she had tried to perform an exorcism on her neighbor years before. My friends and I were sitting around my dining room table. Our dining room and living room are in the same room, which connects to the kitchen, which then connects to the computer room. 2010, we were sitting around listening to tunes on the computer. I've got about 16 gigs worth of music on there. Anyway, we had been hanging out and talking for a while, and no one noticed that the music had stopped. After a joke, or something, we got quiet for about a second. Then someone brought up how the computer had stopped playing music. No one had gone back there or anything. Very subtly, we hear the sound of high heels walking down in what sounds like an alleyway, playing from the computer. We went back to the computer there to check it out and see the screensaver was on, so obviously no one had touched the computer. The footsteps begin to pick up. Then a woman screams bloody murder. Just as she finishes screaming, the Mother Ghostbusters theme song comes on. We moved the mouse to check where the track had originated from. There were no internet tabs open or anything, just iTunes, and it had been paused. There was nothing on the desktop, and I don't have the Ghostbusters theme song downloaded. It was like if there was a ghost, it was taunting us for us taunting it. I should also mention that the alarm clock went off around 2 or 3 a.m. when the power was out once. That house was all kinds of creepy. We had regular electronic hauntings. My family moved into an older house when I was about 6 or 7 years old. My brother and I used to see an old woman appear, wearing an ankle-length dress with frilly collar and brooch on her neck, and her white hair in a bun. She would usually appear while we were playing with cars on the floor, or something to that effect. She would stand over us, wagging her finger, as if to signify we were being scolded. Then she would disappear. Happened repeatedly. That, combined with the sound of people walking in the halls all night long, an incident in which the shadow of a hand illuminated my entire bedroom window, voices whispering my name, the cold spots in the kitchen area, and some other strange occurrences, we only lived there for about 3 months. During this time, I started having really vivid dreams about a Raggedy Andy-style doll my mom owns. Dreams of the doll stalking me and dragging me away. The nightmares persisted for about 8 years or so consistently. I'm 34 years old now, and still, when I visit my parents' house, I can't sit in the same room with that doll. When I was about 2 years old, my mom bought a Ouija board, and she said she would always end up talking to the spirit of an 8-year-old boy named Henry, and this spirit would tell my mom how he hated me and how I stole his place in the world and how my mother was supposed to be his mother. About a year after I was born, my mother had a miscarriage. Now about 14 years have passed since the Ouija board conversations, and my mother went to a psychic, never believed in them until this. And the psychic started telling my mom how she was supposed to have 3 children. The psychic then asked her if she had an older teenage son, me, and that there has been a vengeful spirit of a child that has been following me around for years upon years. For as long as I can remember, I've heard voices, scratches, footsteps, seeing shadows, and other similar things. Also, when I was a child, I would always talk to the black man, and after describing it to my parents, they found out I described exactly how my landlord's husband looked, who died fixing the house years before we moved in. Back when I was in middle school, 8th grade I think, my family went to visit some friends who lived outside of the country one summer. It was towards the end of the trip, and I was feeling tired one afternoon, so I went to take a nap in the guest room. I wasn't fully asleep at the time, but I was pretty close when I felt a tickle by my ear. I had longish hair, and the ceiling fan was on, which was all the explanation I needed, so I ignored it. Seconds later, I am wide awake, screaming and clawing at the side of my head as I feel a bug crawl deep into my ear. By the time my mom ran into the room to see what was wrong, I could literally hear the bug moving around in there and making little chirping noises that I never realized a bug could make until it was right next to my eardrum. Once I told my mom what happened, she took me into the bathroom and got me to tilt my ear towards the lights. Bugs are generally attracted to light, but this one either couldn't see it or didn't care, because after 5 minutes of listening to their every move and all of its clicking, chirping noises still hadn't come out. Finally, my mom decided that we needed a new plan and that we should flush it out. I can still remember the little squeak of surprise the bug made as we filled my ear with water. I wanted to dump out the water immediately in hopes that it would come out, but my mom held my head to the side waiting for the bug to come out. Seconds later, I heard this sad, gargling blub noise that sounded like the bug had drowned, and then there was nothing else. It was probably the sound of water filling in the air gap behind the bug, and not the bug actually drowning. I told my mom that I thought it had drowned, and she finally let me empty out my ear, but the bug didn't come out. It has fallen out at some point since then because my doctor never saw anything in my ear, but like I said, I never saw any proof that it was gone. To this day, whenever I feel an itch by my ear, I always have to check. My scariest night of camping. I was on a year-long bicycle tour through several countries a few years ago. I would find places on the side of the road to camp and play my little travel guitar on the side of long dirt roads in the backcountry. The Amazon in Ecuador, the mountains of Peru, etc. I had made it back to the U.S. and only had about 2 days of the trip left. I was in my home state, feeling comfortable and pretty much done after a long trip. Set up the tent in the AZ desert, hung my food high in a cactus, and went to sleep. Just as I was falling asleep in the tent, I heard a small animal, like a raccoon or ringtail, or something scampering toward me near the side of the tent. It would come closer and stop, then closer, then stop. When I got up to see what it was, I would scare it away, accidentally. I wasn't afraid yet. I just wanted to see what little animal this was, but it kept running away when I moved. So eventually I decided to leave the tent flap open and sit with my headlamp turned off but ready, finger on the button, pointed to where I kept hearing the animal approaching. A few minutes later it came back. I heard it coming closer, closer, closer. I hit the button. The headlamp revealed 2 eyes looking at me in the darkness. It didn't move. I still didn't think it was anything but a harmless little animal. Here's where I got goosebumps. During this stare-down contest, I decided to shine my headlamp to the left, 2 more eyes. What? Then to the right, 2 more. Oh no! Further around to the right, 2 more. I leaned out and shined the light over my tent. Behind me, 2 more, then 2 more. Oh no! I was surrounded by something. What animal surrounds tents in the Arizona desert? I grabbed my guitar and strummed it as loudly as possible until the sun rose. When I was probably 5 or 6, I came down with a bit of a cold. It was the weekend, and my mom was working part-time for a hospital back then, so my dad and brother were home with me. I don't remember having a fever when my dad sent me to bed in the middle of the day, but I've convinced myself over the years that it must be the explanation. While lying in bed, trying hard to fall asleep, keeping my eyes shut in hope of forcing it, I started to feel a light breeze on my face. It was summer and my windows were open, so it wasn't a big deal. But it made me open my eyes, and above my bed were these hooded figures. They were just heads, shoulders, and neck. Silently, they floated there. I could make out red, burned, fleshy skin, and dark smiles. They started laughing. They started to circle me. I remember putting my hands over my ears, shutting my eyes, and crying. The laughter grew, and I screamed out for my dad. He ran in and held me, saying it was just a dream. But I had been awake, wide awake, and they had vanished. There's some time after this that I just don't remember. My memory is uncharacteristically choppy about the events directed at following this. But I do remember one more thing. I remember sitting in the trench of the back seat of my dad's car, cowering with my knees pressed against my chest and hands over my ears. My mom was sitting on the back seat with her legs on either side of me, trying to protect me, and I was screaming that they were back, that they wouldn't leave, that they wanted me dead. After that, I don't remember anything. I know we were going to the hospital, and I assume it was all the power of a terrible fever, and those were hallucinations. But, to this day, I get unreasonably panicked when my ears go silent. I don't know how to better explain that sensation. It's just when everything seems so quiet that it hurts. Because that's exactly what I felt whenever those hooded figures appeared. When I was around 12 to 13, I went to Kmart with my mom and stepbrothers to get groceries. It was a Saturday, early afternoon. My stepbrothers, they were younger than me, and I run off to go screw around in electronics. I'm standing in front of the big wall of TVs watching whatever was on, when suddenly I feel two large hands slam down on my shoulders. I was startled, and I hear this man behind me say, "You have something on you." I try to pull away from the guy, but his grip was so tight on my shoulders, I couldn't get away. I'm also pretty paralyzed with fear too. At this point, I don't know what to think. Am I getting kidnapped, or is there some giant poisonous spider on my back? What is this guy's deal? He ends up taking a picture of my butt. I'm in shorts and a t-shirt, WDF, and then lets me go and walks away. I couldn't even begin to process what just happened. I found my stepbrothers and left to find my mom. I never told her what happened. I just walked around the grocery store with her with a knot in my stomach. I figured she would just yell at me for letting him walk away like that. She's that kind of person. By the time I would have found somebody in the store and told them, I'm sure the guy was already taking off in his car. To this day, I still wonder if I let some pedophiles walk away. What else has he done to other kids? I got off easily, comparatively, but what if he really hurt somebody else and I had a chance to stop him? I never understood paralyzed with fear, but I absolutely experienced it that day. Sometimes you want to scream with all you might, but you're so terrified, nothing comes out. In 2004, I went canyoneering in Utah with a group from my climbing gym. In our group, there was Rick, not real name, who was the most experienced among all of us and our appointed leader for the expedition. Rick also has all the gear, and he claimed he has studied the route well. En route to the cave, while we stopped by and hung out at a climber's cafe, we met an older gentleman. Let's call him Joe, who was by himself and who also happened to be going to the same exact cave that we're going to. So naturally, we teamed up. Joe also had a fair number of gears on him, which we thought couldn't hurt our chances. Besides, he's kind of old, about middle-aged-ish. We actually couldn't believe he was going alone. I think the general rule is you need at least two people going down a hole. Anyway, long story short, the day of the climb, this was after we hiked to the cave for 2 days, we parked our cars and we had to approach the trail on foot. Joe already said that he's got a bad feeling about the climb. We promptly shut him up and told him not to jinx anything, because that would be bad luck. Joe just shrugged and continued suiting up. In caving, it is common for people to wear wetsuits because the water inside the cave never sees sun, hence very cold. I remember it was a very sunny day. There was no indication of rain whatsoever. It was sky-high blue, and it was warm. This was late July. So, we began our descent. I was still a newcomer then, barely knowing anything about reading maps or routes, or setting up anchors beyond some simple knots and hitches. I remember there were 8 of us. 5 guys, 3 chicks. One of the chicks was problematic. From the 2 days of hiking, I can tell that she was spoiled and difficult person. But what can I do? She was the girlfriend of one of Eric's best friends. We hiked, descended, further and further down into the hole. I still have no idea how far the hole really was, but we hiked for maybe 2-3 hours, and then we heard it, a faint, quiet rumbling, almost like the hum of a big generator. The sound reverberated throughout the chamber, first curiously low, like an exceptionally low, deep bass, and then becoming louder and louder, accompanied by a sudden rush of chilly wind. That's when we heard Joe lost. "Run!" He was screaming on top of his lung. "Run, run, run, run! No, no, now, no!" I saw Joe's headlamp shaking in the distance. He was running. Hard. I've never seen a middle-aged man haul ass like Joe did that day. He was the leader, frontmost, and I was about third from the last guy. We were in a narrow passage, tall enough for us to uncomfortably stand and creep around while the ceiling hits our head at about a foot. If the chamber is flooded with water, we'd all be dead in no time. And that was exactly what was happening. It was a flash flood. Freak July rain had fallen on the surface, and the rainwater is now rushing to the depths of the caves. You would not believe how fast the water rose. It's not even funny. As we ran and heaved frantically with our wet suit and backpacks and gears, I could see how the water was deep at first. I ran for another 30 seconds, and the water was ankle deep already. Another 30 seconds, and the water was shining deep. Another 30, and it was knee-deep. I really lost myself at that time. I genuinely thought I was going to die in that cave that day, drowned in that narrow chamber along with 7 other strangers that don't even qualify as my friends yet. They're just people I met at the climbing gym. And Joe, who we picked up by the roadside. It was getting harder to move around. By that time, the water had reached waist level. We could only waddle now. I couldn't even describe the atmosphere at that time. It was pure terror, a lot of screaming, total panic, and desperation. The girls, of course, completely lost themselves, and this only made matters worse. Scumbag Tracy started breaking down and froze in her tracks. I mean, she froze. Right there, in that flooding chamber, 5 people blocking behind her. She also hasn't put on her wetsuit yet, despite repeated suggestions before we entered the cave to put on the wetsuit, because it will be harder to put on the wetsuit once you're inside. I remember the water hitting us was cold, like icy death cold, and it made our movements even more difficult. Finally, Dave, scumbag Tracy's BF, managed to pull her with all his might, and we started moving again. By that time, the water had reached our chest. I kept praying, please stop the water, but of course the water kept coming. It was an insanely desperate situation. More water kept coming, and it felt like a big fire hydrant had let loose, and with its tremendous force, pushing us all to a certain doom. I fought and struggled to keep moving, and all of a sudden I felt that it was getting easier and easier for me to move. Suddenly, I popped out at a larger chamber with a large body of standing water. I scrambled to get away from the entrance, where lots and lots of water were still coming through, as far as I could. I entered the standing water of the chamber. It was even colder than the flood water. This is water that has never seen the sun, and it could be as cold as frozen lake water for all I know. It was so cold that I actually immediately contracted a cramp on my right leg, which was so painful. And I was already wearing a winter wetsuit. Everyone was still screaming and panicking, and we all limply swam to the other side of the chamber so we didn't drown in this new chamber because it wasn't that big, and we could see that water was coming in faster than we could swim. But there's a problem. By that time, we had reached the lowest point of the cave, and one does not simply clamber up the hole you were in higher ground without first setting up some kind of anchor system to help you get there. Besides, there were multiple paths or doors. Carelessly going down the wrong path can really kill you, in terms of oxygen and further risk of flooding or getting stuck or running out of supplies. You really need to know your route. Anyway, so now Joe started to yell, "Get inside the crevice. Get inside the crevice." In this new chamber, there turned out to be small crevices in which we could take cover, and because of its elevated position above the ground, this makes perfect sense. So, each of us found our hole and clambered into it, and we watched the water rise, and rise, and rise. It never seemed to stop. The girls started crying. The guys were dead silent. Each of us were grinding our gears like, how could this happen? Am I going to die in this cave? I don't even know how many meters underground I was. How long until they search for us? I'm sure not soon enough. We're all going to be dead by then. Oh no, man. I wonder if death by drowning is going to be painful. How long does it take until I lose consciousness? What will the world think? 8 people dead while caving. Are we going to be on the news too? My gears kept grinding, kept going. I had 1,000 thoughts. See, they say that life flashes before you in your moment of dying. To me, what I remember most were the questions. That's all I remember were the questions. Non-stop, pounding, incessant, driving me to the brink of madness. But then, just as sudden, the water stopped. First it was getting calmer, then trickled, then stopped. Complete silence, except for the sobs coming from the girls. By then, the chamber was about, how do I say this, 2/3 full? Anyway, it was at a level where it definitely went above our heads, but not high enough to allow us to reach the ledge where the doors are. We still had to build the anchor. So, we clambered down and swam towards the exit. Mother, the water was so cold. I'm going to cut most of the details here because it is long and boring, but suffice it to say this. It turns out that Joe, the old guy we picked up by the roadside by chance, was the only guy who had the gear that got us out of that hole. It turned out Rick had brought the wrong gears, or forgotten a crucial gear. Whatever it was, here's the chilling story. If we hadn't met Joe and picked him up along the way, we couldn't have gotten out of that hole for a good day or two, or however long for rescue to start searching for us. By which time, there highly likely be a casualty already. Scumbag Tracy, Dave's GF, could have died from hypothermia. She had brought a summer wetsuit where the rating for the cave was for the winter wetsuit, and it was one size bigger, so it was rattling off her body. She basically wasn't wearing anything. Don't even ask our journey to get to the surface after that. With her in tow. Oh, and another 2 days of approach. Walk back to car. It's not paranormal or anything, but it did freak me out quite a bit. I think I was about 10 years old, just sleeping in my bed. Anyway, I had a bad dream. I still remember it. Some darker version of my older brother was strangling me, and I was dying. The feeling of not being able to breathe was very realistic. As always with nightmares, I woke up. I remember thinking, oh good, it's over. And I take a deep breath to calm down, expecting the feeling of sweet air. Except that I can't breathe. Not a bit. There is no air going onto my lungs. Of course, I am panicking. It's hard to describe the sheer terror I felt in that moment. I really felt as if I was going to die. Luckily for me, my father had heard me wheezing and having difficulties with my breathing and was already next to me and got me downstairs and managed to calm me down a bit. But I can still remember expecting to feel the relief of fresh air in my lungs, only to be instantly replaced by the terror and the knowledge that you're going to die. Not the only time it happened either, but the next few times at least I knew it was an attack and that I wasn't going to die. Edit, forgot to mention, I'm an asthmatic and I was having sort of an asthma attack. I went to the Chengdu Panda Park this summer while in China. I just kind of dropped by with my tour guide because we had some downtime between shopping trips and my parents had a meeting with some government guy. We were walking through the park, which is like a city zoo except just with pandas, and this guy in a Columbo-style trench coat started following us. We went up to see some red pandas and there was a deserted stretch of path. The guy was standing at the end of the path with a black umbrella open. This wasn't weird because China is hot in the summer and people often have umbrellas to keep the sun off them. But something was just off about the guy. He kept looking at us with this odd face. I am a strong teenage guy. My guide was a 20-something athletic girl. I wasn't worried because he was a frail, middle-aged man with pasty skin. I started to watch him the entire day, and he kept opening and closing his umbrella whenever he would enter the sunlight. Just as we left the park, the man nodded at me and smiled. He had sharp, jagged teeth. So, it's late summer in a small town near Calgary. Me and my friend are outside at 11 o'clock near some undeveloped land. We decide to wander around it, and we have to go through a bit of barbed wire fence. That's okay, as we have a system. Anyway, we get over the fence and to this big dirt hill. We climb it up, but right as we reach the top and are about to slide down, we see this large, and it means an enormous collection of what looks like tents. We lay down and decided to observe. Around 15 to 20 minutes later, what looks like a hobo with a ginger beard comes out. We think that if this guy sees us, we will be dead meat. So right as we were about to go back down the hill, yet another group comes by. Expect this time they're in a motorized golf cart with a spotlight on the front. We quickly shift our bodies and wait for it to pass, then run home. Right as we reach the fence, one of the guys yells, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" and proceeds to run after us. We get through the fence and run straight back to his house. My mom opened a wholesale bakery in the in-laws' quarters of a family friend's home. His mom, who he'd lived with and taken care of for the last 20 years, had recently passed away. She was incredibly old, and he wasn't moving on and was hoarding her stuff. One day I was working in the bakery, and I was flooded with an image of this woman I didn't recognize yelling at me in a mix of Serbian, English, and Russian. She was originally born in Serbia, asking me where he was over and over and over again. Everywhere I went, she followed me and kept telling me he needed to move on and get rid of the dresses, did not know he was hoarding her clothes at the time, and to forgive her other children, who were screwing their brother over, also was unaware of this. Eventually, she went away when I learned he wasn't there. And when I described her, he pulled up a photo of her in that exact outfit, which I'd never seen before, but looked just like her. Scared me, and a year later, I still can't explain it.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.